This is the third and the final tape on the New Order of Barbarians. This interview by Randy Engel, director of the U.S. Coalition for Life, with Dr. Larry Dunegan, was taped on October 10th, 1991, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So I think, why don't we open up with a little bit about the man whom you are talking about on these tapes, just a little profile and a little bit about his education, and particularly his relationship with the population control establishment. I think that probably was his entree into much of this information.
Yeah, Dr. Day was the chairman of the Department of Pediatrics at the University of Pittsburgh from about 1959 through 64, about that period of time. And then he left the University of Pittsburgh and went to fill the position of medical director of the Planned Parenthood Federation of America.
And he was about 1965 to 68, about that period?
Yeah, that'd be about the time, 64, 65 to about 68 or 69. And then he left there. I don't know specifically why. I did not know him intimately. We were, more than acquainted. I was a student, and he would see me in lectures. And so he knew my name as a student and probably corrected some of my test scores and that sort of thing. Of course, I knew him as a lecturer who would stand in front of the auditorium and would, listen as he talked about diseases.
And take notes as students?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, take notes.
Okay. Well, it was interesting. This man is not as well known, I think, to our listeners, like names like Mary Calderon, Alan Guttmacher. They were both medical directors at one time or other for Planned Parenthood. But Dr. Day was not well known, and as a matter of fact, when I went back into the SIGAS archives, there was very, very little information that had his actual name on it. So he was not one of the better known of the medical directors, but I'd say he probably had the scoop on what was going on as well, if not better, than any of the others before or after he came. What was he doing? Can you describe the scene of this particular lecture, the approximate date, and what was the occasion, and then a little bit about the audience?
Oh, yeah, this was the Pittsburgh Pediatric Society holds about 4 meetings each year where we have some speaker come in and talk about medical topic related to pediatrics. And this was our spring meeting. It's always late February or early part of March. This was in March of 1969. And it was held at a restaurant called Lamont, which is
well known in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, a beautiful place. Overlooks the confluence of the Ohio, where the Ohio River forms, the confluence of the Allegheny and the Monongahela River. Very, very pretty place. In attendance, I would say somewhere in the neighborhood of 80 people.
Mostly physicians?
Yeah, mostly physicians, if not exclusively physicians. Predominantly pediatricians, but there would be pediatric surgeons and pediatric radiologists, other people who were involved in medical care of children, even though they might not be pediatricians as such.
And the speech was given after a meal, I presume a very nice meal, and everyone was settled down and
quite comfortable
and quite filled and really an ideal state to absorb what was ever coming. I think that when you're listening to the tape, and he says some of the most, well, not only outrageous things, but also things that you would think a pediatrician would kind of almost jump off out of his seat out. For example, on the tapes when he mentioned the cancer cures. Now, there were probably doctors in the audience who had children, perhaps with treating a child or knowing of a child who was in need of a particular cancer cure, and to hear that they were sitting, some of these, prescriptions for or treatments for cancer were sitting over at the Rockefeller Institute, and yet, as far as I got from the tape, everyone just kind of sat there, didn't say very much. I mean, he's talking about falsifying scientific data, and everyone just kind of yawns, and How long did the speech go on?
2 hours. He spoke for over 2 hours, which was longer than most of our speakers go. And one of the interesting things, as he finished, and it was getting late, he said that there's much, much more, but we could be here all night, but it's time to stop. And I think that's significant, that there was much more that we never heard. In the beginning of the presentation, I don't know whether I mentioned this on at the introduction of the first tape or not, but somewhere in the beginning of this, he said, you will forget most or much of what I'm going to tell you tonight. And at the time, I thought, well, sure, that's true. We tend to forget. You know, somebody talks about it, you can forget a lot of what they say. But there is such a thing as the power of suggestion. And I can't say for sure, but I do wonder if this may not have been a suggestion when we were all full of a nice dinner and relaxed and listening.
End of an evening.
We took that suggestion and forgot, because I know a number of my colleagues who were there when I would, some years later, say, do you remember when Dr. Day said this, or he said that, or he said the other? And I'd say, well, yeah, I kind of, is that what he said? Yeah, I kind of remember that. But most were not very impressed, which to me was surprising because, well, he used the example of cancer cures, but he said a number of things that...
like doctors making too much money and...
Yeah, you know, changing the image of the doctor. You're just going to be a high-paid technician rather than a professional who exercises independent judgment on behalf of his independent patient. A number of things I thought that should have been offensive and elicited a reaction from physicians because they are physicians. I was surprised at how little reaction there was to it. And then other things that I would have expected people to react to just because they were human beings. And I think most of the people at the meeting subscribe more or less to the Judeo-Christian ethic and codes of behavior. And that was violated right and left. And particularly one of my friends who I thought would be as disturbed as I was about this just sort of smiled and wasn't disturbed at all. And I thought, gee, this is surprising.
Was part of it also because of his prominence? I mean, he was...
the authority.
The authority
figure. Yeah, I think there may be something to there. This is the authority. We sort of owe some deference here.
And he couldn't possibly mean what he's saying, or there couldn't possibly be any... I mean, he's such a good guy. You know, I've often heard that phrase. Geez, he's such a good guy. I can't believe that he'd actually mean things.
I can only speculate about this, but I do think at the time there was an element of disbelief about all of this, thinking, oh, this was somebody's fairy tale plan, but it will never really happen because it's too outlandish. Of course, we know step by step it is indeed happening right under our feet.
Yeah. Before talking about the specific areas, I think there's a lot of benefits from this tape. One of them is when we have a good idea of what the opposition is about and the techniques he's using, then you can turn around and begin your resistance to all the types of manipulation and so forth. So I think that one of the ways I'd like to start off here is to talk about seeing that there were 4 or 5 like theme songs that he kept on repeating them over and over again. For example, this business, which I think is so important, that people fail to distinguish between the ostensible reason and the real reason. In other words, if you want someone to do something and you know that initially he'll be balky at doing that because it's against his morals or against his religious beliefs, you have to substitute another reason that will be acceptable. And then after he accepts it and it's a fait accompli, then there's just no turning back.
Right.
And
it was in that connection that he said, people don't ask the right questions.
Yeah, and also too trusting.
Too trusting.
Yeah, yeah.
And this was, as I recall, directed mostly at Americans. I had the feeling they thought Europeans maybe were skeptical and more sophisticated, but Americans are too trusting and don't ask the right questions.
Well, with regard to this kind of almost a lack of discernment, I guess that's basically what he was saying. They were easily tricked or too trusting. I think the thing that really flashed through my mind rather quickly is, for example, in schools, how quickly so-called AIDS education was introduced. And it did amaze me because if a group stated publicly that they wanted to introduce the concept of sodomy or initiate sex earlier in children, and that was the reason given, most parents, I presume, wouldn't go for that. So you have to come up with another reason. And of course, the reason for this so-called AIDS education was to protect children from this disease. But actually, as it turns out, it's really been a great boon for the homosexual network, because through various things like Project 10, they've now have access to our children from the youngest years. These programs are going on from K through 12, and I imagine into college and beyond, so that they are reaching a tremendous segment. And speaking of children, I gathered that this speaker, he kept on making the point about, old people, they're going to go by the wayside. So I presume that the emphasis for these controllers or this new world order is really an emphasis on youth. Would that be
Absolutely, yes. Emphasis on youth. This was stated explicitly. People beyond a certain age, they're set in their ways. You're not going to change them. They have values. They're going to stick to them. But you get to the youth when they're young, they're pliable. You move them in the direction you want them to go. So this is absolutely correct. They're targeting the young. They figure you old folks that don't see it our way, you're going to be dying off, or when the time comes, we're going to get rid of you. But it's the youngsters we have to mold in the impression we want.
Yeah,
right.
Which is common sense. I think most totalitarians have.
Now, there's something about the homosexuality, too, I think, to expand on. I don't think this came out of the original tape, but there was. First of all, we're going to promote homosexuality, and secondly, we recognize that it's bizarre, abnormal behavior. But this is another element in the law of the jungle, because people who are stupid enough to go along with this aren't fit to inhabit the planet, and they'll go by the wayside. I'm not stating this precisely the way he said it, but it wasn't too far from there where there was some mention of diseases being created. And when I remember the one statement and remember the other statement, I believe that AIDS is a disease which has been created in the laboratory. And I think one purpose that AIDS serves is to get rid of the people who are so stupid as to go along with our pro-homosexual program. Let them wipe themselves out. Now it's hard for me to make clear how much of this is I'm remembering with great confidence and how much is pure speculation. But as I synthesize this, this is, I think, what happens. If you're dumb enough to be convinced by our promotion of homosexuality, you don't deserve a place, and you're going to fall by the wayside sooner or later.
Right.
We'll be rid of you. We'll select out the people who will survive, or those who are also smart enough not to be deluded by our propaganda.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Well, it certainly makes sense for them, and I think also this early sex initiation has the overall purpose, which I think we'll get to in depth a little later, but of the sexualization of the population. When he said on the tape, basically anything goes, I think that is what we're seeing. It's not so much that, let's say, someone may not adopt the homosexual death style for himself, but as a result of the propaganda, he certainly will be a lot more tolerant of that type of behavior too. So it's a desensitization, even for the individual who doesn't go over and accept it for himself.
With the power of propaganda, you dare not be against homosexuals, otherwise you could label homophobe. You dare not be against any of our program for women, otherwise you're a male chauvinist pig. It's like anti-Semitism. This label gets enough currency in the culture that people get shot being stuck with it.
Yeah.
So it's easier to keep quiet.
Well, another theme was this business about change. Okay. And I wanted to get to change in relationship to religion and family, but during the period when I was hearing this tape, I remember going to a mass, and they happened to have at that point dancing girls on the altar, and so when I was sitting and was getting a chance to listen to the tape, I thought, as a Catholic, that has been, if you talk about the effective change, probably the most difficulty, and the hardest thing has been to watch our traditional Mass, that which Catholics have practiced, those things which they've practiced and believed for so long. And in about that time this tape or the speech was given, which was about late 1969, everything had begun to turn over on its head, so much so that I think many people feel that now when they go into a church where there is the Novus Ordo, you're almost in a constant state of anxiety because you're not quite sure.
What am I going to encounter?
What are you going to encounter now? I mean, we're going to have you look at the little songbook. Of course, that's changed radically, and then you see, instead of brethren, you see people, or you might see something odd happening up at the up at the altar, which is now the table, and so
the notion of God as eternal, and the teachings of Jesus Christ as eternal, and therefore the teachings of the Church as eternal, depends on the authority of God. And God brings about change in God's way. What this boils down to me is these people say, no, we take the place of God. We establish what will change and what will not change. So if we say homosexuality or anything is moral today, wasn't yesterday, but it is today, we have said so, therefore it's moral. And we can change tomorrow. We can make it immoral again tomorrow. And this is the usurpation of the role of God to define what the peons, what the ordinary person is supposed to believe. So the idea is that if everybody's used to change, most people aren't going to ask, well, who has decided what should be changed and how it should be changed? Most people just go along with it, like hemlines and shoe styles and that sort of thing. So it is a usurpation of the role of God. And if you read the Humanist Manifesto, somewhere early in the introductory part of it, they say human intellect is the highest good. Well, to any human being, what you call the highest good, that's your God. So to these people, human intellect, being the highest good, is God. And where does human intellect reside? Well, in the brain of one or more human beings. So these people, in effect, I don't think they would be so candid as to say so, but whether they know it or not, what they're saying is, I am God, we are God, because we decide what is moral today, what is moral tomorrow, what's going to be moral next year. We determine change.
That's right. And of course, in a nutshell, you just explained the human potential, New Age, all the new esoteric movements that we've seen. But with regard to change, he seemed to acknowledge that there were a couple of entities which traditionally blocked this change and therefore made people resistant to constant manipulation. Mm-hmm. And of course, one of those is the family.
Yeah.
And that would include the family, grandmothers, grandfathers, or ethnic background, and so forth. And I guess I was impressed by everything he seemed to mention, whether it was economics, whether it was music, had the overall effect of diminishing the family and enhancing the power of the state.
Right. Yeah.
That was just a constant theme. And therefore, when we're evaluating things, I think one of the things we should generally say to ourselves is, what effect does that have on family life and the family? And I think if every congressman or senator asked that question, we probably wouldn't have much action up on Capitol Hill, because almost everything coming down the pike has a fact of, disavowing, hurting the family life, and enhancing and expanding the power of government.
It has an ostensible purpose, and then it has a real purpose.
Yeah, and as a so-called helping professional, your ability to say that is really interesting.